Question 1. Process analysis reveals a manufacturer has received a series of minor, non-conformity reports concerning a Class E medical device over the past 6 months. These reports, individually, do not suggest a serious incident or a significant deviation from intended performance. However, when aggregated, they indicate a slight but consistent increase in the occurrence of a specific type of user error leading to suboptimal device function. Which of the following approaches best reflects the manufacturer's obligations under the Medical Device Regulation, EU 2017/745, regarding post-market surveillance? Option A. Continue to monitor the situation passively, only initiating a formal investigation if the number of reports reaches a predefined threshold for a serious incident as outlined in the manufacturer's PMS plan. Option B. Focus on addressing each reported nonconformity in isolation, providing individual user feedback and minor adjustments to the user manual without a comprehensive trend analysis. Option C. Systematically collect, record, and analyze all reported nonconformities, regardless of individual severity, to identify trends and assess the cumulative impact on the device's safety and performance, initiating corrective actions if necessary. Option D. Escalate all minor nonconformity reports to the notified body for review, as the cumulative nature of these reports may indicate a potential systemic issue requiring external assessment. Correct answer is C. Systematically collect, record, and analyze all reported nonconformities, regardless of individual severity, to identify trends and assess the cumulative impact on the device's safety and performance, initiating corrective actions if necessary. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in post-market surveillance (PMS) for medical devices under the EU MDR regulation, EU 2017/745. The challenge lies in interpreting and acting upon a series of minor, nonconformity reports that, individually, might not trigger immediate significant concern. However, their cumulative nature suggests a potential systemic issue or a trend that could impact device safety or performance over time. Professionals must exercise careful judgment to distinguish between isolated incidents and emerging patterns, balancing the need for proactive risk management with the avoidance of unnecessary overreaction. Difficulty is amplified by the need to maintain compliance with the MDR's stringent PMS requirements while ensuring efficient resource allocation. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic and proactive evaluation of all reported nonconformities, regardless of their individual severity. This aligns directly with the principles of Article 83 of the MDR, which mandates a proactive and systematic PMS plan. By aggregating and analyzing these reports, a manufacturer can identify trends, assess the cumulative risk, and determine if the overall safety and performance of the device are still adequate. This approach demonstrates best professional practice by adhering to the MDR's emphasis on continuous monitoring and risk management. It ensures that potential issues are identified and addressed before they escalate into serious safety events, thereby protecting public health and maintaining market access. This proactive stance is ethically sound, fulfilling the manufacturer's responsibility to ensure device safety throughout its life cycle. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to dismiss the reports individually because they are minor and do not meet the threshold for immediate serious incident reporting under Article 87. This fails to acknowledge the cumulative risk principle inherent in PMS. Ethically and regulatorily, this is a failure to conduct adequate PMS as required by Article 83, which mandates the collection and analysis of all PMS data to assess the device's safety and performance. Another incorrect approach is to wait for a significant number of reports to accumulate before initiating a formal investigation, potentially delaying necessary corrective actions. This is a reactive rather than proactive stance, violating the spirit and letter of the MDR's PMS requirements and increasing the risk of harm to patients. A third incorrect approach is to focus solely on the immediate cause of each individual report, without considering the broader context of the device's performance and potential systemic weaknesses. This narrow focus can lead to superficial fixes that do not address the root cause of recurring issues, thus failing to ensure the long-term safety and performance of the device as mandated by the MDR. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to PMS, guided by the manufacturer's PMS plan. This involves establishing clear criteria for data collection, analysis, and action. When faced with multiple minor nonconformity reports, the decision-making process should involve 1. Immediate aggregation of all relevant reports. 2. Trend analysis to identify any patterns or increases in frequency. 3. Root cause analysis for any identified trends. 4. Risk assessment of the cumulative impact on safety and performance. And 5. Implementation of appropriate corrective and preventive actions. COPPA. As per Article 83 and Annex Roman 3 of the MDR, this systematic process ensures that all available information is utilized to maintain the highest standards of device safety and regulatory compliance. Question 2. The assessment process reveals that a manufacturer has a medical device that currently holds a valid CE certificate issued under Directive 93/42/EEC, MDD. The device has not undergone any significant changes in its design or intended purpose since its initial certification. The manufacturer wishes to continue placing this device on the market after the date of application of the Medical Device Regulation, MDR 2017/745. Which of the following represents the most appropriate regulatory pathway under the MDR 2017/745 for this scenario? Option A. The device can continue to be placed on the market and put into service indefinitely with its existing MDD CE certificate, as long as no significant changes are made. Option B. The device must immediately undergo a full conformity assessment procedure under the MDR 2017/745 to obtain a new CE certificate before it can be placed on the market. Option C. The device can continue to be placed on the market and put into service provided that the manufacturer implements a quality management system in accordance with Article 10(9) of the MDR by 26 May 2024, and the device does not undergo significant changes in design or intended purpose. Option D. The device can continue to be placed on the market and put into service under the MDD CE certificate until 26 May 2024, after which it must cease to be available. The correct answer is C. The device can continue to be placed on the market and put into service provided that the manufacturer implements a quality management system in accordance with Article 10(9) of the MDR by 26 May 2024, and the device does not undergo significant changes in design or intended purpose. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a common challenge in regulatory affairs: the interpretation and application of the Medical Device Regulation, MDR 2017/745, when dealing with legacy devices and their transition to the new framework. Specifically, the question probes the understanding of the different pathways available for such devices, highlighting the critical need for accurate classification and adherence to the MDR's timelines and requirements. The professional challenge lies in navigating the complexities of the MDR, particularly annexes and transitional provisions, to ensure continued market access for devices that were previously compliant under older directives. Misinterpreting these provisions can lead to non-compliance, potential product recalls, and significant business disruption. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it demonstrates a thorough understanding of the MDR's transitional provisions, specifically Article 120. This article outlines the conditions under which devices with a valid CE certificate issued under Directive 93/42/EEC, MDD, or Directive 90/385/EEC, aimed, can continue to be placed on the market or put into service after the date of application of the MDR. It requires that the device does not undergo significant changes in design or intended purpose, and that the manufacturer implements a quality management system in accordance with the MDR by a specified date. This approach prioritizes regulatory compliance and patient safety by ensuring that the device continues to meet the MDR's essential safety and performance requirements, even under the transitional arrangements. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the continued validity of the old CE certificate, without considering the MDR's requirements for significant changes or the implementation of an MDR-compliant QMS, fails to acknowledge the MDR's intent to progressively upgrade the regulatory oversight of medical devices. This oversight failure can lead to devices remaining on the market that may not fully meet the MDR's enhanced safety and performance standards, posing a risk to patients. Another incorrect approach, which assumes that all legacy devices automatically fall under the MDR scope without any specific transitional provisions, demonstrates a lack of understanding of the MDR's phased implementation and can lead to premature and unnecessary regulatory burdens. A third incorrect approach, which suggests that a new CE marking under the MDR is required immediately for all legacy devices regardless of their certification status, ignores the specific transitional provisions designed to facilitate a smoother transition and could lead to unnecessary delays and costs for manufacturers. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic review of the device's current regulatory status, its intended purpose, and any planned modifications. This should be followed by a detailed examination of the MDR's transitional provisions, particularly Article 120, and relevant guidance documents from the European Commission or notified bodies. Manufacturers should consult with their notified body to confirm the appropriate pathway and ensure all MDR requirements, including QMS implementation and post-market surveillance, are addressed within the stipulated timelines. Question 3. The assessment process reveals that a manufacturer is seeking to place a novel medical device on the EU market. This device utilizes a new technological principle not previously seen in similar devices. The manufacturer has conducted some preliminary bench testing and has gathered some limited data from early-stage non-clinical studies. They are proposing to rely on this limited data and a general literature review of similar, but not equivalent, technologies to support their clinical evaluation, arguing that a full clinical investigation would be overly burdensome and delay market access, which approach best aligns with the requirements of the Medical Device Regulation, EU 2017/745, for demonstrating the safety and performance of this novel device. Option A. Rely on the limited preliminary data and general literature review, supplemented by a strong post-market surveillance plan to gather real-world evidence after market entry. Option B. Utilize the existing bench testing and non-clinical study data, combined with a justification that the novelty of the technology inherently implies safety due to its advanced nature. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive clinical investigation as required by Annex Roman 14 of the MDR, focusing on the specific technological novelty and potential risks, and use the findings to build a robust clinical evaluation report. Option D. Assert equivalence to an existing, well-established device based on a broad similarity in intended purpose, and use the clinical data of the equivalent device for the clinical evaluation. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive clinical investigation as required by Annex Roman 14 of the MDR, focusing on the specific technological novelty and potential risks, and use the findings to build a robust clinical evaluation report. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a common challenge in medical device regulatory affairs, balancing the need for robust clinical evidence with the practicalities of bringing innovative devices to market. Specifically, this scenario requires a deep understanding of the Medical Device Regulation, MDR, EU 2017/745, requirements for clinical evaluation, and the circumstances under which clinical investigations are mandatory. The challenge lies in interpreting the MDR's provisions to determine if existing data is sufficient or if new clinical investigation is necessary to demonstrate conformity, particularly for a device with novel technological characteristics. This requires careful consideration of the device's intended purpose, its novelty, and the potential risks associated with its use, all within the framework of Article 61 and Annex Roman 14 of the MDR. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes patient safety and the scientific validity of the clinical evidence supporting the device's claims. By thoroughly evaluating the equivalence of the novel device to an existing one and critically assessing the available scientific literature, the manufacturer demonstrates due diligence in fulfilling the MDR's requirements for a comprehensive clinical evaluation. This proactive and evidence-based approach minimizes the risk of noncompliance and ensures that the device's safety and performance are adequately demonstrated before it reaches the market. It aligns with the ethical imperative to protect public health. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the absence of adverse events in preliminary use would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. The MDR mandates a proactive approach to evidence generation, not a reactive one. Relying on the lack of reported incidents does not constitute a robust clinical evaluation and fails to address potential risks that may not yet have manifested or been reported. This approach neglects the requirement for systematic data collection and analysis to demonstrate safety and performance. Another incorrect approach, such as assuming equivalence without a rigorous justification based on the specific criteria outlined in the MDR, would also be a failure. Equivalence is a complex determination that requires detailed comparison of the device's intended purpose, technical characteristics, and biological properties. A superficial or unsubstantiated claim of equivalence bypasses the critical scrutiny required by the regulation, potentially leading to the marketing of a device with insufficient evidence of safety and performance. Finally, an incorrect approach that delays the generation of clinical data until post-market surveillance reveals issues would be a severe regulatory and ethical lapse. Post-market surveillance is a complementary activity to pre-market evaluation, not a substitute for it. The MDR requires that sufficient clinical evidence be available to support the conformity assessment before the device is placed on the market. Relying on post-market data to identify safety concerns is a failure to meet the fundamental obligations of the MDR and puts patients at undue risk. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a systematic process. First, a thorough understanding of the device's characteristics and intended use. Second, a comprehensive review of existing scientific literature and data relevant to the device and its intended use. Third, a critical assessment of potential equivalence to existing devices, adhering strictly to the MDR's criteria. And fourth, if existing data and equivalence are insufficient, a well-designed clinical investigation plan that addresses any residual uncertainties regarding safety and performance. This structured approach ensures that all regulatory requirements are met and that patient safety remains paramount. Question 4. The audit findings indicate a discrepancy in the interpretation of the notified body's review scope for the clinical evaluation report, CER, of a Class Roman III implantable device. The manufacturer believes their internal review of the CER is comprehensive, but the audit suggests the notified body's role in verifying the CER's adequacy might be more extensive than initially understood. Which of the following actions best addresses this situation in accordance with the Medical Device Regulation, MDR, 2017/745? Option A. Initiate a formal consultation with the notified body to clarify their specific requirements and expectations for reviewing the CER and technical documentation for Class Roman III devices, ensuring alignment before proceeding. Option B. Amend the technical documentation to include a more detailed description of the device's intended use and performance, without directly engaging the notified body on the CER review scope. Option C. Request the notified body to conduct a full clinical investigation for the device, as this would definitively satisfy any concerns about the CER's adequacy. Option D. Proceed with the conformity assessment based on the manufacturer's internal assessment of the CER, assuming the notified body's review is primarily focused on the technical documentation's completeness. The correct answer is A. Initiate a formal consultation with the notified body to clarify their specific requirements and expectations for reviewing the CER and technical documentation for Class Roman III devices, ensuring alignment before proceeding. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential nonconformity in the conformity assessment procedure for Class Roman III implantable device. This scenario is professionally challenging because it directly impacts patient safety and market access for a high-risk medical device. The manufacturer must navigate the complex requirements of the Medical Device Regulation, MDR, 2017/745, specifically concerning the role and responsibilities of the notified body in the conformity assessment process for Class Roman III devices. A misinterpretation or misapplication of these requirements can lead to significant regulatory delays, product recalls, and reputational damage. Correct approach, which involves engaging the notified body to clarify the scope of their involvement in reviewing the clinical evaluation report, CER, and the technical documentation, represents best professional practice. Under MDR 2017/745, for Class Roman III devices, the notified body is mandated to conduct a thorough review of the technical documentation, including the CER, as part of the conformity assessment. This review is critical to ensure the device's safety and performance are adequately demonstrated. Proactively seeking clarification from the notified body ensures that the manufacturer's understanding aligns with the notified body's interpretation of the MDR requirements, thereby facilitating a smoother and compliant conformity assessment. This approach upholds the ethical responsibility to prioritize patient safety by ensuring robust evidence of clinical benefit and risk mitigation. An incorrect approach would be to assume the notified body's review is limited to the technical documentation's completeness without scrutinizing the CER's adequacy. This fails to acknowledge the notified body's crucial role in verifying the clinical evidence supporting the device's safety and performance, a key requirement for Class Roman III devices under the MDR. Ethically, this demonstrates a lack of diligence in ensuring the device's clinical validity. Another incorrect approach would be to proceed with the conformity assessment without addressing the audit finding, believing the internal quality management system is sufficient. This is a significant regulatory failure, as it bypasses the mandatory oversight by the notified body for Class Roman III devices. It also represents an ethical failure by potentially placing a device with unverified clinical evidence on the market. A further incorrect approach would be to unilaterally decide that the CER is adequate based solely on internal expertise, without seeking the notified body's explicit confirmation. This disregards the notified body's statutory authority and expertise in assessing the clinical evidence for high-risk devices. It is a regulatory failure to circumvent the established conformity assessment pathway and an ethical failure to prioritize external, independent verification of critical safety and performance data. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough understanding of the MDR 2017/745, particularly Annex Roman 9, conformity assessment based on a quality management system, and on the assessment of technical documentation, and Annex X, clinical evaluation. When faced with audit findings or uncertainties regarding regulatory requirements, the first step should always be to consult the relevant regulatory text. If ambiguity persists, direct and transparent communication with the designated notified body is paramount. This involves clearly articulating the concern, providing relevant documentation, and seeking their official interpretation and guidance. Documenting all communications and decisions is crucial for demonstrating due diligence and compliance. Question 5. The evaluation methodology shows a novel in vitro diagnostic device for early cancer detection has demonstrated high analytical and clinical performance metrics, yet a subset of users reported significant psychological distress due to the possibility of false positive results. Considering the ethical implications and the medical device regulation, MDR/745 EU, which of the following actions best addresses this situation? Option A. Modify the device's algorithm to eliminate all false positives, even if it means a reduction in sensitivity and a potential increase in false negatives. Option B. Remove the device from the market due to the reported psychological distress, as patient well-being is paramount and cannot be adequately mitigated. Option C. Enhance the instructions for use (IFU) and labeling to clearly communicate the possibility of false positives, the potential for psychological distress, and provide guidance on appropriate follow-up and support, while maintaining the device's current performance profile. Option D. Acknowledge the reported psychological distress, but deem it an acceptable risk given the device's high sensitivity and specificity, and proceed with market placement without significant changes to user information. The correct answer is C. Enhance the instructions for use (IFU) and labeling to clearly communicate the possibility of false positives, the potential for psychological distress, and provide guidance on appropriate follow-up and support, while maintaining the device's current performance profile. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows a novel in vitro diagnostic (IVD) device intended for the early detection of a rare but aggressive cancer. The manufacturer has conducted extensive analytical validation and clinical performance studies, demonstrating high sensitivity and specificity. However, a small but statistically significant proportion of users in the clinical performance study reported experiencing considerable psychological distress due to false positive results, even though the overall false positive rate was within acceptable regulatory thresholds for similar devices. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it pits the device's intended performance against its potential for causing patient harm through psychological distress. a form of harm not always explicitly quantified in standard performance metrics. Balancing the benefit of early detection against the risk of undue patient anxiety requires careful ethical and regulatory consideration beyond mere statistical performance. The correct approach prioritizes patient well-being and informed consent, aligning with the ethical principles underpinning medical device regulation. This involves a thorough risk-benefit assessment that explicitly considers psychological harm. It necessitates clear, unambiguous information in the instructions for use (IFU) and labeling regarding the possibility of false positives and the potential for psychological distress, along with guidance on appropriate follow-up actions and support. This proactive communication empowers patients and healthcare professionals to make informed decisions, mitigating the risk of harm and ensuring the device is used appropriately. This aligns with the General Safety and Performance Requirements (GSPR) of the MDR, particularly those related to information supplied by the manufacturer and the need to minimize risks. An incorrect approach would be to solely focus on the statistically acceptable false positive rate and the device's high sensitivity and specificity, dismissing the reported psychological distress as an unavoidable consequence of diagnostic testing. This fails to acknowledge the ethical obligation to minimize all forms of harm, including psychological distress, and neglects the manufacturer's responsibility to provide adequate information to users. Another incorrect approach would be to downplay the significance of the reported distress in the IFU, perhaps by burying it in dense technical language or omitting specific guidance on managing the emotional impact of results. This would be a failure of transparency and a violation of the principle of informed consent, potentially leading to inappropriate patient management and increased anxiety. A third incorrect approach would be to suggest modifying the device's algorithm to eliminate all false positives, even if this significantly compromises sensitivity, and thus the primary benefit of early detection. This would represent an overcorrection that undermines the device's intended purpose and could lead to misdiagnosis, a more severe form of harm. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a systematic process. First, thoroughly investigate the reported psychological distress to understand its nature and extent. Second, conduct a comprehensive risk-benefit analysis that explicitly includes psychological harm as a risk factor. Third, develop clear and accessible information for users that accurately reflects the device's performance and potential consequences, including psychological impact. Fourth, engage with relevant stakeholders, including clinicians and patient advocacy groups, to gather input on appropriate risk mitigation strategies. And finally, document all decisions and justifications thoroughly in the technical documentation. Question 6. Assessment of the appropriate risk management documentation update process for a medical device with a minor software update, considering the requirements of the EU Medical Device Regulation, MDR, 2017/745, and ISO 14971. Manufacturer has implemented a minor software update to a Class E medical device that primarily addresses a user interface enhancement and includes minor bug fixes. The update does not alter the device's intended use, performance specifications, or core functionalities. What is the most appropriate approach to updating the risk management documentation? Option A. Conduct a superficial review of the risk management file, making minor cosmetic changes without a documented assessment of the update's potential impact on risks. Option B. Perform a complete top-to-bottom reevaluation of the entire risk management file, including all hazard analyses and risk assessments, as if it were a new device submission. Option C. Conduct a targeted review of the risk management file, focusing on the specific areas of the device and its intended use that are directly impacted by the software update, and document the rationale for the scope of this review. Option D. Disregard the software update and make no changes to the existing risk management file, as the update is minor and does not affect core functionalities. The correct answer is C. Conduct a targeted review of the risk management file, focusing on the specific areas of the device and its intended use that are directly impacted by the software update, and document the rationale for the scope of this review. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in medical device risk management, determining the appropriate level of detail and ongoing review for risk management documentation when a device undergoes a minor software update. The challenge lies in balancing the need for thoroughness, as mandated by the MDR and ISO 14971, with the practicalities of efficient product lifecycle management. A minor update might seem insignificant, but its impact on the device's safety and performance must be rigorously assessed. Overly burdensome reviews can delay market access, while insufficient reviews can lead to undetected risks. Professional judgment is required to identify the critical aspects of the update that necessitate a full reevaluation of the risk management file. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a targeted reevaluation of the risk management file, focusing specifically on the aspects of the device and its intended use that are directly affected by the software update. This aligns with the principles of ISO 14971, which emphasizes a continuous and iterative risk management process throughout the device's lifecycle. Article 10 of the MDR requires manufacturers to establish, document, implement, keep up to date, and continually improve a risk management system. This includes reviewing the risk management process and its outputs, such as the risk management file, at planned intervals, and whenever there is a significant change. A minor software update, even if seemingly small, could potentially introduce new hazards or alter the probability or severity of existing risks. Therefore, a focused review, rather than a complete overhaul or complete disregard, is the most efficient and compliant method to ensure that the update does not compromise the device's safety. This approach demonstrates best professional practice by ensuring continued compliance with the MDR's requirements for ongoing risk management, while avoiding unnecessary administrative burden. Incorrect approach is analysis. Disregarding the update entirely and not updating the risk management file is a significant regulatory failure. Article 10.10 of the MDR mandates that the risk management system be kept up to date. A software update, by its nature, changes the device. Failing to assess the risk implications of this change means the risk management file no longer accurately reflects the device as placed on the market, violating the MDR's requirement for a continuously updated risk management system. This also constitutes an ethical failure, as it prioritizes expediency over patient safety. Conducting a complete, top-to-bottom reevaluation of the entire risk management file for every minor software update is overly burdensome and inefficient. While thoroughness is important, ISO 14971 and the MDR advocate for a risk-based approach to the risk management process itself. A disproportionate effort for a minor change, without a clear indication of significant new risks, can detract from resources that might be better allocated to more critical risk assessments. This approach fails to demonstrate efficient resource management within the risk management framework. Performing a superficial review without documenting the rationale for the limited scope of the review is also problematic. While a targeted review is appropriate, the decision-making process for determining the scope of the review must be documented. This documentation should demonstrate that the potential impact of the software update on hazardous situations, and risks has been considered, and that the limited scope is justified. A lack of documented justification for the review scope can lead to questions during audits about the adequacy of the risk management process. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a risk-based decision-making framework. This involves 1. Understanding the regulatory requirements, MDR Article 1010, ISO 14971. 2. Analyzing the nature and scope of the change, the software update. 3. Identifying potential impacts of the change on device functionality, performance, and safety. 4. Determining the extent of the risk management review required based on the identified impacts. This might involve reviewing specific hazard analyses, risk controls, or even reperforming certain risk assessments if the change is significant. 5. Documenting the entire process, including the rationale for the scope of the review and any resulting updates to the risk management file. This systematic approach ensures compliance, patient safety, and efficient use of resources. Question 7. Comparative studies suggest that manufacturers often struggle with the dynamic nature of technical documentation under the EU MDR 2017/745. Considering the lifecycle management of a medical device, which approach to maintaining technical documentation best ensures ongoing compliance and reflects the device's current state. Option A. Implementing a formal change control system that mandates a review and update of relevant sections of the technical documentation for any modification to the device, its manufacturing process, or any new information impacting its safety or performance, with updates integrated into the documentation prior to the change's implementation or as soon as feasible thereafter. Option B. Updating the technical documentation only when a significant design overhaul is undertaken or when a new device version is released, relying primarily on post-market surveillance reports to identify and address any emerging safety concerns without necessarily amending the core technical documentation. Option C. Focusing updates on the technical documentation solely when required by a specific request from a notified body during an audit, assuming that the existing documentation is sufficient for routine operations and ongoing compliance until such a request is made. Option D. Maintaining separate, unlinked records for design changes and post-market surveillance findings, with the technical documentation primarily serving as a historical record of the initial conformity assessment, updated only at the discretion of the Quality Assurance Department without a defined trigger mechanism. The correct answer is A. Implementing a formal change control system that mandates a review and update of relevant sections of the technical documentation for any modification to the device, its manufacturing process, or any new information impacting its safety or performance, with updates integrated into the documentation prior to the change's implementation or as soon as feasible thereafter. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for medical device manufacturers aiming for compliance with the EU Medical Device Regulation, MDR, 2017/745. The core difficulty lies in interpreting and applying the broad requirements for technical documentation to a specific device's lifecycle. Manufacturers must demonstrate that their technical documentation is not merely a static collection of data, but a dynamic, living record that accurately reflects the device's design, performance, and safety throughout its intended lifespan. The challenge is to balance the need for comprehensive documentation with the practicalities of ongoing product management and regulatory scrutiny, ensuring that the documentation remains relevant and up-to-date without becoming an insurmountable administrative burden. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves establishing a robust system for the continuous review and updating of technical documentation, triggered by any changes to the device, its manufacturing process, or new safety information. This aligns directly with Article 8 and Annex Roman II of the MDR, which mandate that technical documentation shall be kept up to date. Specifically, Annex Roman II, Section 1, requires that the technical documentation should contain information that allows the conformity of the device to be assessed. If a device undergoes design modifications, changes in materials, manufacturing processes, or if new clinical data emerges that impacts the risk-benefit analysis, the technical documentation must be revised accordingly. This proactive approach ensures that the documentation accurately reflects the current state of the device, facilitating ongoing conformity assessment, post-market surveillance, and any necessary regulatory submissions. It demonstrates a commitment to product safety and regulatory compliance throughout the device's lifecycle, which is a cornerstone of the MDR. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that technical documentation only needs to be updated if a significant design change occurs, such as a change in intended use or a major component alteration. This fails to recognize that even seemingly minor modifications, such as a change in a supplier for a non-critical component or an update to sterilization parameters, can have implications for device performance, biocompatibility, or sterility, and therefore must be reflected in the technical documentation. This approach risks presenting an inaccurate picture of the device to regulators and can lead to non-compliance if issues arise that are not adequately documented. Another incorrect approach is to only update the technical documentation during the initial conformity assessment process and then rely solely on the post-market surveillance, PMS, report to capture any subsequent issues. While PMS is crucial for identifying emerging risks, it is not a substitute for updating the technical documentation itself. The technical documentation should reflect the current understanding of the device's safety and performance, including any mitigations or design adjustments made in response to PMS findings. Failing to integrate these updates into the technical documentation means that the primary evidence of conformity is not current, potentially hindering effective regulatory oversight and risk management. A third incorrect approach is to maintain separate, unlinked documentation for design changes and PMS activities, with no formal process to integrate findings from PMS into the technical documentation. This creates a fragmented system where the technical documentation may not fully represent the device as it is currently manufactured and used. The MDR emphasizes a holistic approach to device safety and performance, and this fragmentation undermines that principle, making it difficult to demonstrate a complete and accurate understanding of the device's risk profile and conformity. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to managing technical documentation. This involves establishing clear procedures for change control that mandate a review of the technical documentation's impact for any proposed change. Regular internal audits of the technical documentation against the actual device and its manufacturing processes are essential. Furthermore, fostering a culture of continuous improvement and regulatory awareness within the organization ensures that all relevant personnel understand their role in maintaining accurate and up-to-date technical documentation. When faced with uncertainty about whether a change necessitates an update, it is always prudent to err on the side of caution and consult with regulatory experts or conduct a thorough impact assessment. Question 8. The assessment process reveals that a medical device, previously CE marked under the Medical Devices Directive, MDD, is still being placed on the EU market. The manufacturer has not yet initiated any formal process to recertify the device under the Medical Device Regulation, MDR, 2017/745, believing the existing MDD CE marking is sufficient for continued market access. Which of the following actions best represents the correct regulatory approach for the manufacturer to ensure ongoing compliance and market access under the MDR? Option A. Cease all sales and distribution of the device within the EU until a full MDR certification is obtained, as the previous MDD CE marking is no longer considered valid for any purpose. Option B. Immediately engage with a notified body to determine the appropriate MDR conformity assessment route and initiate the recertification process, ensuring all MDR requirements for technical documentation, clinical evaluation, and post-market surveillance are met. Option C. Continue placing the device on the market based on the existing MDD CE marking, assuming it remains valid indefinitely until a significant change to the device is planned. Option D. Update the existing MDD technical documentation to reflect minor changes made since the original certification and continue marketing the device without further notified body involvement. The correct answer is B. Immediately engage with a notified body to determine the appropriate MDR conformity assessment route and initiate the recertification process, ensuring all MDR requirements for technical documentation, clinical evaluation, and post-market surveillance are met. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in medical device regulatory affairs, navigating the transition of a device from the previous Medical Devices Directive, MDD, to the Medical Device Regulation, MDR, 2017/745. The challenge lies in correctly identifying the applicable regulatory framework and ensuring compliance with the MDR's more stringent requirements, particularly concerning conformity assessment and post-market surveillance, while also managing the implications of the previous CE marking. Misinterpreting the regulatory status or the requirements for continued market access can lead to significant compliance gaps and market disruption. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough reevaluation of the device's classification and conformity assessment route under the MDR. This is best professional practice because Article 120 of the MDR provides specific transitional provisions. For devices with a valid CE certificate issued under the MDD, continued placing on the market is permitted under certain conditions, including that the device does not undergo significant changes in design or intended purpose. However, the MDR mandates that these devices must eventually be recertified under the MDR. Therefore, proactively engaging with a notified body to determine the appropriate MDR conformity assessment route and initiate the recertification process, even if the MDD certificate is still valid, ensures continued market access and compliance with the MDR's evolving requirements. This demonstrates a commitment to regulatory diligence and risk management. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that the existing MDD CE marking automatically grants indefinite market access under the MDR without any further action. This fails to acknowledge the MDR's transitional provisions, which are time-limited and require eventual conformity assessment under the MDR. This approach risks non-compliance when the transitional periods expire or if the device undergoes any modification. Another incorrect approach is to solely rely on the previous MDD technical documentation without any review for MDR compliance. The MDR introduces new or enhanced requirements for technical documentation, clinical evaluation, and post-market surveillance. Failing to update and supplement the existing documentation to meet these MDR requirements constitutes a significant regulatory failure and a potential risk to patient safety. A third incorrect approach is to delay engagement with a notified body until the MDD certificate is close to expiry. While the MDR allows for continued market access under certain conditions, the recertification process under the MDR is often lengthy and complex. Procrastination can lead to a gap in CE marking, forcing the device to be withdrawn from the market, which is detrimental to business operations and patient access to the device. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a proactive and systematic approach. This involves 1. Understanding the MDR's transitional provisions, Article 120, and their implications for legacy devices. 2. Conducting a thorough gap analysis between the MDD requirements and the MDR requirements for the specific device. 3. Engaging early with a notified body to discuss the device's classification and the most appropriate MDR conformity assessment route. 4. Updating technical documentation, clinical evaluation reports, and post-market surveillance plans to meet MDR requirements. 5. Developing a clear roadmap and timeline for MDR certification. This structured approach minimizes regulatory risk, ensures patient safety, and facilitates smooth market access under the new regulatory regime. Question 9. To address the challenge of ensuring full compliance for a Class E medical device that incorporates a medicinal substance, which conformity assessment procedure, as outlined by Regulation EU 2017/745, is most appropriate to satisfy both the device and medicinal product regulatory requirements? Option A. A conformity assessment procedure that relies on self-declaration of conformity by the manufacturer, without external assessment of either the device or the medicinal substance. Option B. A conformity assessment procedure solely managed by a notified body, focusing exclusively on the device's technical documentation and quality management system. Option C. A conformity assessment procedure that involves a notified body for the device aspects, but omits the requirement for assessment of the medicinal substance by the competent authority for medicinal products. Option D. A conformity assessment procedure that includes the involvement of a notified body for the device aspects and requires a positive opinion from the competent authority for medicinal products regarding the medicinal substance. The correct answer is D. A conformity assessment procedure that includes the involvement of a notified body for the device aspects and requires a positive opinion from the competent authority for medicinal products regarding the medicinal substance. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge for manufacturers of Class E medical devices under the EU Medical Device Regulation, MDR 2017/745. The core difficulty lies in selecting the appropriate conformity assessment procedure when the device incorporates medicinal substances, as this introduces a dual regulatory requirement. Manufacturers must navigate both the MDR and the specific legislation governing medicinal products. The professional challenge is to correctly identify the conformity assessment route that satisfies both regulatory frameworks without creating undue delays or non-compliance. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the chosen procedure adequately addresses the safety and performance of the device itself, as well as the quality and safety of the medicinal substance it contains. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it acknowledges the integrated nature of the device and its medicinal component, mandating a conformity assessment procedure that explicitly accounts for both. Under the MDR, devices incorporating medicinal substances are typically subject to Annex X EC Production Quality Assurance System and product-related controls, combined with Annex Roman 11 Type Examination or Annex Roman 9 Product Conformity, based on Quality Management System and product-related controls. But crucially, They also require a positive opinion from a competent authority for medicinal products regarding the medicinal substance. This ensures that the medicinal aspect is assessed by the relevant medicinal product regulatory framework, while the device aspect is assessed under the MDR. This dual assessment is essential for comprehensive patient safety and regulatory compliance. An incorrect approach that bypasses the requirement for a competent authority opinion on the medicinal substance is professionally unacceptable. This failure constitutes a significant regulatory breach because it neglects a critical safety element of the product. The MDR explicitly states that for devices incorporating medicinal substances, the conformity assessment must take into account the medicinal substance. Failing to obtain the necessary opinion means the medicinal component has not undergone the rigorous assessment required by medicinal product legislation, potentially leading to risks associated with the efficacy, quality, or safety of the drug itself. This is an ethical failure as it prioritizes speed or simplicity over patient safety. Another incorrect approach would be to solely rely on a conformity assessment procedure designed for non-combination devices, even if it involves a notified body. While a notified body is essential for assessing the device aspects, it is not the competent authority for medicinal products. This approach fails to recognize the unique regulatory status of a medical device incorporating a medicinal substance as a combination product, which necessitates input from both device and medicinal product regulatory authorities. This oversight can lead to a product that is compliant with one set of regulations, but not the other, creating a significant compliance gap and potential patient harm. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough understanding of the device's classification and its constituent parts. Manufacturers must meticulously review the MDR, specifically annexes related to conformity assessment, and identify any specific provisions for combination products or devices incorporating medicinal substances. Crucially, they must consult the relevant national competent authorities for medicinal products in the member states where the device will be placed on the market to understand their specific requirements and the process for obtaining the necessary opinion. A risk-based approach, considering the potential hazards associated with both the device and the medicinal substance, should guide the selection of the conformity assessment procedure. Collaboration between regulatory affairs specialists, quality assurance personnel, and technical experts involved in the device and medicinal substance development is paramount. Question 10. Market research demonstrates that a new medical device is designed for both diagnostic imaging of internal organs and for delivering targeted therapeutic ultrasound energy to break down kidney stones. The device is non-invasive and is intended for use by trained medical professionals. The diagnostic imaging component utilizes low-intensity ultrasound waves, while the therapeutic component uses higher-intensity waves. Based solely on the Medical Device Regulation, EU 2017/745, which classification best reflects the regulatory requirements for this device? Option A, Class EIB, due to the therapeutic function of delivering high-intensity energy to alter body tissue, which is considered a significant intervention. Option B, Class Roman III, as the device has a dual function that could potentially cause harm if not precisely controlled. Option C, Class I, as the device is non-invasive and intended for use by trained professionals, suggesting a lower inherent risk. Option D, Class IA, considering the diagnostic imaging function and the non-invasive nature, with the therapeutic aspect being a secondary function. The correct answer is A, Class EIB, due to the therapeutic function of delivering high-intensity energy to alter body tissue, which is considered a significant intervention. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in medical device regulatory affairs, accurately classifying a novel device with multiple intended uses. The complexity arises from the device's potential to interact with the body in different ways, each potentially falling under a different classification rule within the MDR regulation, EU 2017/745. Professional judgment is paramount because an incorrect classification can lead to significant consequences, including inadequate conformity assessment, delayed market access, and potential patient harm. The challenge is amplified by the need to consider the primary intended purpose and the most stringent classification rule that applies. The correct approach involves a thorough analysis of each intended use against the classification rules outlined in Annex Roman 8 of the MDR. Specifically, one must identify the highest risk class applicable to any of the device's intended uses. This requires a deep understanding of the definitions of invasive, implantable, active, and the duration of contact with the body, as well as the specific criteria for each class, IEB Roman 3. Adhering to the most stringent rule ensures that the device undergoes the appropriate level of scrutiny and conformity assessment, thereby safeguarding patient safety and meeting regulatory obligations. This represents best professional practice as it prioritizes patient safety by ensuring the device is regulated according to its highest potential risk. An incorrect approach might involve classifying the device based solely on its most common or perceived primary use, ignoring other significant intended uses that carry a higher risk. This is a regulatory failure because the MDR mandates classification based on the highest risk associated with any intended use. Ethically, it is unacceptable as it potentially exposes patients to risks that have not been adequately assessed and controlled. Another incorrect approach could be to apply a classification rule that is too lenient because the device's mechanism of action is novel or complex, leading to a misinterpretation of its interaction with the body. This is a failure to apply the rules as written and a disregard for the precautionary principle inherent in medical device regulation. It also represents a lack of due diligence in understanding the device's full potential impact. The professional decision-making process for such situations should involve a systematic review of all intended uses. This includes consulting the MDR's Annex Roman 8 classification rules, relevant MDCG, Medical Device Coordination Group, guidance documents, and potentially seeking expert opinion or engaging with notified bodies early in the process. A risk-based approach, always erring on the side of caution when in doubt, is crucial. Documenting the rationale for the chosen classification, including the analysis of each intended use and the justification for selecting the highest applicable risk class, is also a critical component of professional practice. Question 11. Governance review demonstrates that the clinical evaluation report for a novel implantable device has been drafted. The literature review section primarily relies on a single, broad search query across one publicly accessible database, and the selected articles are not systematically appraised for their scientific rigor or direct relevance to the specific device's intended use and patient population. Which approach to the literature review best aligns with the requirements of the Medical Device Regulation, MDR, 2017/745, for ensuring a robust clinical evaluation? Option A. Relying exclusively on published clinical investigations of the specific device, and if none are found, concluding that literature review is not necessary for the clinical evaluation. Option B. Conducting a systematic literature search across multiple relevant databases using predefined specific search terms, followed by a critical appraisal of identified literature for scientific validity, relevance, and potential biases, and then synthesizing this evidence alongside any available clinical investigation data. Option C. Utilizing a single, broad search query in one database to identify a representative sample of literature, and then including all retrieved articles in the clinical evaluation report to ensure comprehensive coverage. Option D. Prioritizing literature that supports the device's claimed benefits, while briefly acknowledging any contradictory findings without in-depth analysis, and limiting the search to articles published within the last 5 years. The correct answer is B. Conducting a systematic literature search across multiple relevant databases using predefined, specific search terms, followed by a critical appraisal of identified literature for scientific validity, relevance, and potential biases, and then synthesizing this evidence alongside any available clinical investigation data. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a nuanced understanding of the Medical Device Regulation, MDR, 2017/745, requirements for clinical evaluation, specifically concerning the use of literature. The challenge lies in balancing the need for robust clinical evidence with the practicalities of literature searching and the interpretation of its relevance and quality. A thorough and systematic approach is crucial to ensure the clinical evaluation report, adequately supports the device's safety and performance claims, thereby fulfilling the manufacturer's obligations under the MDR. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it adheres strictly to the principles outlined in the MDR and its associated guidance documents, such as MEDEV 2, 7/1 Rev 4. A systematic literature search, employing well-defined search terms and databases, ensures that all relevant scientific literature is identified. Critical appraisal of the identified literature, assessing its quality, relevance to the specific device, and potential biases, is essential for determining the weight of evidence. The subsequent synthesis of this evidence, alongside any clinical investigation data, allows for a comprehensive assessment of the device's benefit-risk balance and its intended performance. This methodical process directly supports the manufacturer's declaration of conformity and the CE marking of the device. An incorrect approach that relies on a superficial or biased literature search fails to identify all relevant data, potentially overlooking safety concerns or performance limitations. This is a regulatory failure as it compromises the thoroughness of the clinical evaluation, a mandatory component of the technical documentation. Ethically, it is unacceptable as it could lead to a device being placed on the market without adequate evidence of its safety and performance, potentially endangering patients. Another incorrect approach that uncritically accepts all identified literature without proper appraisal is also a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach risks incorporating low-quality, irrelevant, or biased studies into the CER, leading to an inaccurate assessment of the device's clinical evidence. This undermines the scientific validity of the CER and the manufacturer's ability to demonstrate compliance with the MDR's requirements for a robust clinical evaluation. A third incorrect approach that focuses solely on literature and neglects to consider any available clinical investigation data for the specific device or equivalent data for a similar device is also problematic. While literature is a crucial source of information, the MDR emphasizes a comprehensive approach that includes all available relevant clinical data. Ignoring existing clinical investigation data, if available and relevant, would be a failure to utilize all pertinent evidence, potentially weakening the CER. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured, evidence-based methodology. This includes clearly defining the scope of the literature search based on the device's intended use, patient population, and potential risks, employing a systematic and reproducible search strategy, critically appraising the retrieved literature using established criteria, and synthesizing the findings in a manner that directly addresses the safety and performance objectives of the device. This process should be iterative and documented thoroughly within the CER. Question 12. System analysis indicates that a novel, complex diagnostic device intended for use in a busy hospital laboratory environment requires extensive technical specifications and operational guidance to ensure accurate results and safe handling. The device's physical footprint is limited, and the primary users are highly trained laboratory technicians. Considering the requirements of the Medical Device Regulation, MDR, EU 2017/745, what is the most appropriate approach for providing the necessary labeling and instructions for use? Option A. Rely solely on a web-based portal accessible via a QR code on the device for all instructions for use, assuming all laboratory technicians will have constant internet access and the necessary devices to view the information. Option B. Print all instructions for use in a very small font size on the device itself to conserve space, assuming users will be able to zoom in or use magnification tools if needed. Option C. Include all technical specifications, operational procedures, and troubleshooting guidance directly on the device's label, prioritizing maximum information density to ensure users have everything at their fingertips. Option D. Provide essential safety warnings in the device identifier directly on the device, with comprehensive instructions for use, including all technical specifications, operational procedures, and troubleshooting guidance, provided in a separate, easily accessible electronic format, and a printed booklet accompanying the device. The correct answer is D. Provide essential safety warnings and the device identifier directly on the device, with comprehensive instructions for use, including all technical specifications, operational procedures, and troubleshooting guidance, provided in a separate, easily accessible electronic format, and a printed booklet accompanying the device. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge in balancing the need for comprehensive labeling with the practical limitations of device size and user comprehension. The manufacturer must ensure that all legally mandated information is present and understandable, while also considering the user's ability to access and interpret it effectively. Overloading the label can lead to confusion and noncompliance, while omitting critical information poses a direct risk to patient safety and regulatory adherence. The challenge lies in determining the most appropriate method for conveying essential information within the constraints of the device and its intended use, all while strictly adhering to the MDR. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes patient safety and regulatory compliance by ensuring that all mandatory information required by the MDR is accessible and understandable to the intended user. This involves a risk-based assessment of how best to present this information, considering the device's complexity, intended use environment, and the user's likely technical proficiency. Utilizing a combination of on-device labeling for critical identifiers and safety warnings, and providing detailed instructions for use (IFU) in a separate document or electronically is a common and effective strategy. This approach aligns with Article 23 and Annex I, Chapter Roman 3 of the MDR, which outline the requirements for labeling and IFUs, emphasizing clarity, legibility, and the provision of necessary information for safe and effective use. The risk assessment ensures that the chosen method mitigates potential harms arising from misinterpretation or lack of information. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to solely rely on minimal on-device labeling, omitting detailed instructions for use. This fails to meet the MDR's requirement for comprehensive information necessary for safe and effective use, potentially leading to user error and adverse events. Also disregards the need for detailed explanations of device operation, contraindications, and potential risks, which are crucial for informed decision-making by healthcare professionals and patients. Another incorrect approach would be to include excessive, overly technical information on the device label itself, making it illegible and confusing. This violates the principle of clarity and understandability mandated by the MDR. While aiming for completeness, this approach fails to consider the user's ability to process the information, increasing the risk of misinterpretation or overlooking critical details. A third incorrect approach would be to assume that all users will have access to and be able to interpret complex electronic IFUs without providing a clear, accessible alternative for essential information. While electronic IFUs are permitted under certain conditions by the MDR, they must be presented in a way that does not compromise safety. If the primary method of access is not universally feasible or understandable, it constitutes a regulatory failure. Professional reasoning. Professionals must adopt a user-centric and risk-based approach. This involves first identifying all mandatory labeling and IFU requirements under the MDR for the specific device type. Then, a thorough risk assessment should be conducted to determine the potential harms associated with different methods of information presentation. The chosen method should ensure that the intended user can easily access, read, and understand all necessary information for safe and effective use. This often involves a tiered approach, with critical information on the device and detailed instructions in the IFU, considering the user's environment and technical capabilities. Documentation of this risk assessment and the rationale for the chosen labeling strategy is crucial for demonstrating compliance. Question 13. Consider a scenario where a manufacturer of a Class IAB medical device, initially classified based on its intended use and inherent risks, observes a statistically significant increase in the frequency of non-serious complaints related to a specific functional aspect of the device over the past 6 months. The manufacturer's current post-market surveillance (PMS) plan, established at the time of CE marking, primarily focuses on scheduled audits and the reporting of serious incidents as per the Medical Device Regulation, EU 2017/745. Given this emerging trend in complaints, which of the following approaches best aligns with the ongoing obligations under the MDR for post-market surveillance? Option A. Focus solely on ensuring that all serious incidents are reported to the relevant competent authorities within the stipulated timelines, as this is the primary vigilance requirement for Class IAB devices. Option B. Continue with the existing PMS plan, as the complaints are not classified as serious incidents and the device's risk class remains Class IAB, assuming the initial risk assessment was comprehensive. Option C. Proactively review the PMS data, conduct a root cause analysis of the increased complaints, and update the PMS plan to include more frequent monitoring of the specific functional aspect, and potentially revise the risk management file if a new or increased risk is identified. Option D. Increase the frequency of scheduled internal audits to identify potential manufacturing deviations, without specifically analyzing the content or trend of the non-serious complaints received. The correct answer is C. Proactively review the PMS data, conduct a root cause analysis of the increased complaints, and update the PMS plan to include more frequent monitoring of the specific functional aspect, and potentially revise the risk management file if a new or increased risk is identified. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a manufacturer to proactively adapt their post-market surveillance (PMS) strategy based on evolving real-world performance data, rather than relying solely on the initial risk classification. The challenge lies in the dynamic nature of PMS and the need to balance resource allocation with ensuring patient safety and regulatory compliance under the Medical Device Regulation (MDR) EU 2017/745. A rigid adherence to the initial classification without considering emerging trends could lead to inadequate vigilance for a device that, despite its initial classification, is showing signs of increased risk in the field. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it demonstrates a commitment to the core principles of the MDR, particularly Article 83 on post-market surveillance. This approach prioritizes a data-driven, proactive PMS system that is responsive to real-world evidence. By actively reviewing and analyzing PMS data, including complaints and vigilance reports, and then adjusting the PMS plan accordingly, the manufacturer fulfills its ongoing obligation to ensure the safety and performance of its device throughout its life cycle. This proactive stance is ethically sound, as it places patient safety above mere compliance with the minimum requirements of the initial classification. It also aligns with the MDR's emphasis on a continuous improvement cycle for device safety. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the initial risk classification for Class EIB devices, without considering emerging trends and complaints, would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. The MDR mandates a PMS system that is proportionate to the device's risk class and intended use, but it also requires that this system be continuously updated and improved based on experience gained. Ignoring a rising trend in complaints, even for Class EIB device, suggests a failure to implement an effective PMS system as required by Article 83 and Annex Roman III of the MDR. This could lead to delayed identification of potential hazards, increased risk to patients, and ultimately, noncompliance with the MDR's vigilance and corrective action requirements. Another incorrect approach, focusing only on scheduled audits and ignoring real-time complaint data, also represents a regulatory and ethical failure. PMS is not a static process. It requires continuous monitoring and analysis. Relying solely on periodic audits would mean missing critical, time-sensitive information that could indicate an emerging safety issue. This passive approach fails to meet the MDR's expectation of an active and systematic PMS system. A third incorrect approach, which involves only reporting serious incidents to competent authorities, but not analyzing the underlying trends in non-serious complaints, is also a failure. While reporting serious incidents is a critical part of vigilance, the MDR emphasizes the importance of analyzing all PMS data, including trends in non-serious complaints, to identify potential risks and implement preventive actions before they escalate into serious incidents. This selective analysis undermines the proactive nature of PMS. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve establishing a robust PMS system that includes clear procedures for data collection, analysis, and review. Manufacturers must foster a culture where all PMS data, regardless of severity, is considered valuable input. When trends emerge, even if they don't immediately trigger a serious incident report, a thorough risk assessment should be conducted. This assessment should inform decisions about updating the PMS plan, implementing corrective or preventive actions, COPPA, and potentially revising the risk management file. Regular training for PMS personnel on data interpretation and regulatory requirements is also crucial. Question 14. The investigation demonstrates that a manufacturer of a Class E medical device, originally intended for non-invasive diagnostic imaging of superficial tissues, is exploring a new intended use: the application of the same device to image deeper, more sensitive organs within the abdominal cavity. This secondary intended use would involve prolonged exposure and a higher potential for indirect patient interaction. Considering the criteria for classification based on risk and intended use under the Medical Device Regulation, EU 2017/745, which of the following represents the most appropriate regulatory action for the manufacturer to take regarding the device's classification? Option A. Reevaluate the device's classification by applying Annex Roman 8 of the MDR to the new intended use, considering the increased invasiveness and potential consequences of failure, and classify it according to the highest risk class indicated by any intended use. Option B. Classify the device based on the least risky of the intended uses, assuming that the manufacturer can implement additional user training to mitigate any perceived increase in risk. Option C. Maintain the existing Class IA classification, as the primary intended use remains unchanged, and the new application is considered an extension rather than a fundamental alteration. Option D. Proceed with the new intended use under the current Class IA classification, documenting the change in the technical file, but without formal reclassification, as the device's core technology has not changed. Correct answer is A. Reevaluate the device's classification by applying Annex Roman 8 of the MDR to the new intended use, considering the increased invasiveness and potential consequences of failure, and classify it according to the highest risk class indicated by any intended use. Explanation: the investigation demonstrates a common challenge in medical device classification, determining the appropriate risk class when a device's intended use straddles multiple categories or when novel applications are considered. The manufacturer has identified a potential secondary use for their existing Class IA device, which was originally intended for diagnostic imaging. This secondary use, while seemingly minor, could introduce new risks not previously assessed or mitigated for the original classification. The professional challenge lies in balancing innovation and market expansion with the paramount responsibility of patient safety and regulatory compliance under the MDR regulation, EU 2017/745. A rigorous, evidence-based approach is crucial to avoid underclassification, which could lead to inadequate conformity assessment and potential harm. The correct approach involves a thorough reevaluation of the device's classification based on the new intended use, applying the classification rules in Annex Roman 8 of the MDR. This necessitates a detailed assessment of the potential risks associated with the secondary application, considering factors like invasiveness, duration of use, and the body part affected, as well as the potential consequences of failure. If the secondary use, when considered independently or in conjunction with the primary use, leads to a higher risk class, the manufacturer must follow the conformity assessment procedures for that higher class. This ensures that the device undergoes the appropriate level of scrutiny by a notified body, and that its safety and performance are adequately demonstrated for all intended uses. This aligns with the MDR's principle of proportionality, where the level of regulatory oversight is commensurate with the risk posed by the device. An incorrect approach would be to assume the secondary use does not alter the classification simply because the primary intended use remains. This fails to acknowledge that the MDR requires classification based on all intended uses. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on the existing Class IA classification without a formal reassessment, potentially overlooking new risks or the need for additional clinical evidence. This constitutes a failure to comply with the MDR's requirement for continuous vigilance and reevaluation of classification when the intended use changes or expands. Furthermore, attempting to classify the device based on the least risky intended use, rather than considering the highest risk associated with any intended use, is a direct violation of the MDR's risk-based approach. Professional decision-making in such scenarios requires a systematic process. First, clearly define all intended uses, including any proposed new applications. Second, meticulously apply Annex Roman 8 of the MDR to each intended use, considering all relevant rules. Third, if different intended uses suggest different risk classes, the device must be classified according to the highest risk class indicated. Fourth, consult with a notified body early in the process to validate the classification decision, especially when dealing with novel or complex scenarios. Finally, ensure that all documentation, including the technical documentation and clinical evaluation, reflects the determined risk class and the justification for it. Question 15. Upon reviewing the proposed protocol for a clinical investigation of a novel implantable device, a regulatory affairs professional identifies several critical steps that have not yet been completed. The sponsor is eager to commence patient recruitment and data collection to expedite market entry. Which of the following actions, if taken by the regulatory affairs professional, would best ensure compliance with the medical device regulation, EU 2017/745? Option A. Advise the sponsor to proceed with patient recruitment and data collection immediately, as the potential benefits of the device warrant an accelerated timeline, and address any outstanding regulatory requirements retrospectively. Option B. Recommend that the clinical investigation protocol be submitted to and approved by the relevant ethics committee before any participant recruitment or data collection commences. Option C. Suggests that the sponsor prioritize the technical documentation for the device over the ethics committee approval, as the former is a prerequisite for CE marking. Option D. Inform the sponsor that, while ethics committee approval is important, the primary focus should be on ensuring the device's performance data is robust, even if it means delaying formal ethical review. The correct answer is A. Advise the sponsor to proceed with patient recruitment and data collection immediately, as the potential benefits of the device warrant an accelerated timeline, and address any outstanding regulatory requirements retrospectively. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the critical need to balance the advancement of medical knowledge with the paramount protection of human subjects participating in clinical investigations. The regulatory framework under MDR 745/2017 places significant emphasis on ensuring the safety and rights of participants, requiring a rigorous and ethically sound approach to study design and execution. The complexity arises from interpreting and applying these detailed requirements to a real-world situation where potential benefits must be weighed against inherent risks. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes the ethical and regulatory obligations mandated by the MDR. Specifically, it ensures that the clinical investigation protocol is robust, scientifically valid, and designed to minimize risks to participants while generating reliable data. Adherence to the requirements for informed consent, ethical committee review, and the establishment of a clear benefit-risk balance are fundamental pillars of responsible clinical investigation under the MDR. This approach demonstrates a commitment to participant welfare and regulatory compliance, which are non-negotiable in the medical device sector. An incorrect approach that fails to obtain prior approval from the relevant ethics committee before commencing the investigation is a direct violation of Article 62 of the MDR. This failure constitutes a significant regulatory and ethical breach, as ethics committees are mandated to assess the ethical acceptability and scientific validity of the investigation, safeguarding participant rights and well-being. Another incorrect approach that involves proceeding with the investigation without a clear and documented assessment of the benefit-risk balance for participants, as required by Article 62(1)(d) of the MDR, is also professionally unacceptable. This omission undermines the ethical foundation of the investigation, as it suggests that the potential benefits to participants or society do not outweigh the foreseeable risks. A further incorrect approach that neglects to ensure that all investigators and their staff possess the necessary qualifications and training, as stipulated in Article 62(1)(f) of the MDR, poses a serious risk to participant safety. Inadequate expertise can lead to errors in data collection, patient management, and the identification of adverse events, thereby compromising both the integrity of the investigation and the well-being of the participants. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic review of the MDR requirements pertaining to clinical investigations. This includes thoroughly understanding the stipulations for protocol design, ethics committee approval, informed consent procedures, benefit-risk assessment, investigator qualifications, and the reporting of adverse events. Professionals must adopt a proactive stance, ensuring that all necessary prerequisites are met and documented before initiating any clinical investigation. A critical evaluation of the potential risks and benefits, coupled with a commitment to participant safety and data integrity, should guide every decision. Consulting with regulatory experts and ethics committees when in doubt is also a crucial aspect of responsible practice. Question 16. Benchmark analysis indicates that a company has developed a novel device intended to monitor physiological parameters through non-invasive skin contact, providing data to a companion mobile application. The manufacturer claims the device's primary function is to enhance user awareness of their general well-being by tracking trends over time, but it does not diagnose, prevent, or treat any specific disease. Based on the Medical Device Regulation, MDR, 2017/745, which of the following approaches best aligns with the regulatory requirements for determining if this product is a medical device and its subsequent classification? Option A. Classify the device as a medical device under Rule 1 of Annex Roman 8 of the MDR 2017/745, as it is intended to be used for diagnosis and therefore falls into Class IA. Option B. Assume the device is not a medical device because it is non-invasive and does not diagnose or treat specific diseases, thus bypassing the need for MDR compliance. Option C. Classify the device based on its similarity to consumer wellness trackers, which are generally not regulated as medical devices, without a detailed assessment against the MDR definitions and rules. Option D. Determine if the device meets the definition of a medical device under Article 2(1) of the MDR 2017/745 by considering its intended purpose and mode of action, and if so, apply the relevant classification rules in Annex Roman 8 to assign the appropriate risk class. The correct answer is A. Classify the device as a medical device under Rule 1 of Annex Roman 8 of the MDR 2017/745, as it is intended to be used for diagnosis and therefore falls into Class IA. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in the medical device regulatory landscape, accurately defining and classifying a novel product that straddles the line between a medical device and other product categories. The professional challenge lies in the potential for misclassification, which can lead to significant consequences, including noncompliance, market delays, patient risk, and financial penalties. Careful judgment is required to interpret the MDR 2017/745 definitions and classification rules in the context of the product's intended purpose and mechanism of action. The correct approach involves a thorough assessment of the product against the definitions and classification rules laid out in the MDR 2017/745. This means meticulously examining the manufacturer's stated intended purpose, the product's mode of action, and whether it meets the definition of a medical device as per Article 2(1) of the MDR. If it does, then applying the classification rules in Annex Roman 8 of the MDR to determine the appropriate risk class is paramount. This systematic, evidence-based approach ensures compliance with the regulatory framework, prioritizes patient safety by subjecting devices to the correct level of scrutiny, and facilitates a smooth market entry. It represents best professional practice because it is grounded in the explicit requirements of the MDR and demonstrates due diligence. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the product's appearance or its primary function if that function does not align with the MDR's definition of a medical device or its intended purpose. For instance, classifying a product based on its similarity to an existing, well-established medical device without a rigorous analysis of its specific intended use and mechanism of action is a regulatory failure. Another incorrect approach is to assume a product is not a medical device simply because it does not involve invasive procedures or drug delivery, ignoring the broader scope of the MDR's definition. This can lead to the device being placed on the market without the necessary conformity assessment procedures, posing a risk to users and patients. Furthermore, neglecting to consider the classification rules after determining it is a medical device is a critical oversight, as it bypasses the essential risk-based regulatory framework. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Understanding the manufacturer's complete intended purpose and all claimed functionalities. 2. Critically evaluating the product's mode of action. 3. Comparing these against the definition of a medical device in Article 2(1) of the MDR 2017/745. 4. If it meets the definition, systematically applying the classification rules in Annex Roman 8, considering all relevant rules and their interdependencies. 5. Documenting the entire assessment process, including the rationale for the classification decision, to ensure transparency and auditability. Seeking expert regulatory advice, when in doubt, is also a crucial part of this process. Question 17. Examination of the data shows that a manufacturer is developing a new Class EIB implantable device intended for long-term use within the human body. The device incorporates novel materials and a complex mechanism for deployment. The manufacturer is considering different conformity assessment routes under the Medical Device Regulation, MDR, 2017/745, which conformity assessment route, when correctly applied, best ensures the device meets the MDR's requirements for safety and performance for this specific device classification and complexity. Option A. Conformity assessment based on a quality management system and assessment of the technical documentation, with a focus on the production phase, Annex Roman 11. Option B. Conformity assessment based on a quality management system and assessment of the technical documentation by a notified body, with a focus on the design and development phase, Annex Roman 9, Chapter I. Option C. Conformity assessment based on product conformity verification, Annex X. Option D. Conformity assessment based on a quality management system and assessment of technical documentation by a notified body, Annex Roman 9, Chapter Roman 2. The correct answer is C. Conformity assessment based on product conformity verification, Annex X. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for manufacturers seeking to place a new medical device on the EU market under the Medical Device Regulation, MDR, 2017/745. The challenge lies in correctly identifying the most appropriate conformity assessment route based on the device's classification and intended purpose. Misinterpreting the classification or the implications of different routes can lead to significant delays, increased costs, and non-compliance, potentially preventing market access. The manufacturer must navigate the complexities of Annex Roman 9, Annex X, and Annex Roman 11 of the MDR to select the route that ensures robust conformity assessment while being proportionate to the risk posed by the device. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding of the device's classification under Annex Roman 8 of the MDR. For a Class EIB implantable device, the MDR mandates a stringent conformity assessment route. The most appropriate route for a Class EIB device, particularly one with novel aspects or significant risk, is typically Annex Roman 9, Chapter Roman 2, conformity assessment based on a quality management system and assessment of technical documentation. This route involves a comprehensive assessment of the manufacturer's quality management system, QMS, by a notified body, alongside an in-depth review of the device's technical documentation. This ensures that the manufacturer has robust processes for design, development, production, and post-market surveillance, and that the device itself meets all applicable general safety and performance requirements, GSPR. This approach represents best professional practice because it aligns with the MDR's risk-based approach, ensuring a high level of patient safety and device performance for a device with a higher risk profile. It also involves the notified body in a significant oversight role, which is a cornerstone of the MDR for high-risk devices. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to select Annex X conformity assessment based on product conformity verification. This route is generally applicable to lower-risk devices, Class I, EIA, and some EIB, and focuses on product testing and verification rather than a comprehensive assessment of the QMS and technical documentation by a notified body. For a Class EIB implantable device, relying solely on Annex X would be a regulatory failure, as it does not provide the necessary level of assurance regarding the manufacturer's overall quality system and the device's long-term safety and performance, which is a requirement for this classification. Another incorrect approach would be to opt for Annex Roman 11, conformity assessment based on a quality management system and assessment of technical documentation, with a focus on the production phase. While this route also involves a QMS assessment, it places a greater emphasis on the production phase and may not provide the same depth of scrutiny on the design and development aspects as Annex Roman 9, Chapter Roman 2. For a Class EIB implantable device, especially one with novel features, a comprehensive assessment of the entire life cycle, including design and development, is crucial. Choosing Annex Roman 11 could lead to a less thorough review, potentially overlooking critical design risks. A further incorrect approach would be to assume that Annex Roman 9, Chapter I, conformity assessment based on a quality management system and assessment of the technical documentation, is sufficient without considering the specific requirements for implantable devices. While Chapter I is a valid route for many devices, the specific nature of implantable devices often necessitates the more detailed oversight provided by Chapter Roman 2, which includes specific provisions for the notified body's involvement in the assessment of the technical documentation. Professional reasoning. Professionals must adopt a systematic approach to MDR conformity assessment. This begins with accurately classifying the device according to Annex Roman 8. Once classified, the manufacturer must consult the relevant annexes, Roman 9, X, Roman 11, and consider the specific requirements for their device type, e.g., implantable, active, etc. The choice of route should always prioritize patient safety and regulatory compliance, aligning with the risk profile of the device. When in doubt, seeking guidance from a notified body early in the process is crucial. This proactive engagement ensures that the chosen route is appropriate and that the manufacturer is prepared for the required assessments, thereby avoiding costly rework and market access delays. Question 18. Performance analysis shows a consistent, albeit minor, trend of increased energy consumption in a Class EIB active implantable device over its first year of use, which is not currently reflected in the technical documentation. What is the most appropriate regulatory action regarding the technical documentation? Option A. Maintain the current technical documentation as it accurately represents the device's original design specifications and has not yet resulted in a device failure. Option B. Defer updating the technical documentation until the next scheduled periodic safety update report, CER, submission, as the trend is not yet indicative of a failure. Option C. Only update the technical documentation if a formal complaint related to battery life is received from a user. Option D. Update the technical documentation to reflect the observed performance trend and assess its potential impact on the device's safety and performance, initiating further investigation or corrective actions if necessary. The correct answer is D. Update the technical documentation to reflect the observed performance trend and assess its potential impact on the device's safety and performance, initiating further investigation or corrective actions if necessary. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a manufacturer to balance the need for comprehensive technical documentation with the practical realities of ongoing product improvement and market feedback. The challenge lies in determining the appropriate level of detail and the exact point at which updated information must be incorporated into the technical documentation to remain compliant with MDR Article 83 and Annex Roman 2. Failure to do so can lead to noncompliance, impacting market access and patient safety. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves proactively updating the technical documentation whenever performance analysis reveals a significant deviation or a trend that could impact the device's safety or performance. This aligns with the MDR's emphasis on a lifecycle approach to medical device regulation. Annex Roman 2, Section 3. 2 requires that the technical documentation include information on the device's design, intended purpose, and performance, and that this information be kept up to date. Regularly reviewing performance data and updating the technical documentation accordingly ensures that the information reflects the current state of the device, its risks, and its benefits, thereby demonstrating ongoing conformity and supporting post-market surveillance activities. This proactive stance is crucial for maintaining the CE mark and ensuring continued market access. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to only update the technical documentation when a formal complaint or adverse event is reported. This is a reactive approach that fails to address potential issues before they escalate to a level requiring formal reporting. It neglects the manufacturer's responsibility under MDR Article 83 to ensure the device continues to meet the general safety and performance requirements throughout its life cycle. Another incorrect approach is to defer updates until the next scheduled audit or recertification. This ignores the dynamic nature of product performance and the potential for subtle but significant changes that could affect safety or performance, thereby violating the principle of maintaining up-to-date documentation. Finally, an approach that relies solely on the original design specifications without considering real-world performance data is fundamentally flawed. The MDR mandates that technical documentation reflect the actual device as placed on the market and as it performs in use, not just its initial design intent. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a proactive and risk-based approach to technical documentation management. This involves establishing robust systems for collecting and analyzing post-market performance data. When performance analysis indicates a potential impact on safety or performance, a systematic process should be initiated to evaluate the findings and determine the necessity and scope of technical documentation updates. This process should involve relevant internal stakeholders, including quality assurance, R&D, and regulatory affairs. The decision to update should be based on a risk assessment that considers the potential impact on patient safety, device efficacy, and regulatory compliance. This ensures that the technical documentation remains a true and accurate reflection of the device throughout its lifecycle. Question 19. Quality control measures reveal that during a clinical investigation of a novel implantable cardiac device, several participants have reported unexpected and transient episodes of dizziness and palpitations, which are not listed as anticipated adverse events in the current protocol. The sponsor is eager to proceed with the investigation to meet upcoming market launch timelines. What is the most ethically and regulatorily sound course of action? Option A. Report these adverse events in the final clinical study report, but do not interrupt the ongoing investigation, as the number of reported events is currently low. Option B. Downplay the significance of the dizziness and palpitations, assuming they are unrelated to the device and likely due to participant anxiety, and proceed with the investigation without further immediate action. Option C. Continue the clinical investigation as planned, but instruct the investigators to closely monitor the participants experiencing these symptoms and document them in their case report forms for later analysis. Option D. Immediately halt the clinical investigation and initiate a thorough investigation into the reported adverse events to determine causality, severity, and potential impact on participant safety, while also informing the relevant ethics committee and competent authorities. The correct answer is D. Immediately halt the clinical investigation and initiate a thorough investigation into the reported adverse events to determine causality, severity, and potential impact on participant safety, while also informing the relevant ethics committee and competent authorities. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a significant ethical challenge because it involves a potential conflict between the manufacturer's desire to expedite market access for a novel medical device and the paramount ethical obligation to protect the safety and well-being of clinical trial participants. The discovery of unexpected adverse events, even if seemingly minor or potentially unrelated, necessitates a rigorous and unbiased assessment to determine their causality and impact on participant safety. The pressure to proceed with the trial without thorough investigation could lead to serious harm to participants and undermine the integrity of the entire clinical investigation process, which is a cornerstone of medical device regulation under MDR, EU 2017/745. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach, which involves immediately halting the trial and initiating a comprehensive investigation into the reported adverse events, represents best professional practice because it prioritizes participant safety above all else. Article 56 of the MDR, EU 2017/745, concerning clinical investigations, mandates that investigations must be conducted in accordance with ethical principles, including the protection of the rights, safety, and well-being of the subject. This approach aligns with the Declaration of Helsinki and Good Clinical Practice, GCP, guidelines, which are implicitly expected to be followed in the conduct of clinical investigations for medical devices within the EU. A thorough investigation ensures that any potential risks are identified, understood, and mitigated before further exposure of participants. This also upholds the scientific validity of the data being collected, as any confounding factors must be addressed. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that suggests continuing the trial while monitoring the adverse events, without an immediate halt and investigation, fails to adequately address the potential for serious harm. This disregards the precautionary principle and the ethical imperative to act decisively when participant safety is potentially compromised. It could lead to further adverse events, potentially more severe, and compromise the integrity of the data collected, making it difficult to establish a true risk-benefit profile for the device. This approach violates the spirit and letter of MDR EU 2017/745 regarding the conduct of clinical investigations and the protection of subjects. Another incorrect approach, which involves downplaying the significance of the adverse events and attributing them to unrelated factors without a formal investigation, is ethically unacceptable and a clear regulatory failure. This demonstrates a bias towards achieving a desired outcome, market approval, rather than objectively assessing risks. It undermines the scientific rigor required for clinical investigations and could lead to the approval of a device that poses an unacceptable risk to patients. This directly contravenes the requirements for robust data collection and reporting of adverse events as stipulated by the MDR. An approach that proposes to only report the adverse events in the final clinical study report without immediate action or investigation is also professionally unacceptable. The MDR EU 2017/745, particularly Annex Roman 14 concerning clinical investigations, emphasizes the ongoing nature of safety monitoring and reporting. Significant adverse events require prompt assessment and, if necessary, immediate action to protect participants. Delaying the investigation and reporting until the final report stage means that participants could be exposed to ongoing risks without timely intervention, which is a severe ethical and regulatory breach. Professional reasoning. Professionals faced with such a situation should follow a structured decision-making process. First, recognize the potential conflict between commercial interests and participant safety. Second, immediately consult the relevant sections of the MDR EU 2017/745 pertaining to clinical investigations, particularly those concerning safety reporting and the responsibilities of the sponsor and investigator. Third, prioritize the immediate safety of participants by halting the trial if there is any doubt about the safety profile. Fourth, initiate a formal, unbiased investigation involving all relevant parties, including the principal investigator, the sponsor's medical and regulatory affairs teams, and potentially an independent data monitoring committee. Fifth, document all decisions and actions meticulously. Finally, communicate transparently with regulatory authorities and ethics committees as required by the MDR. Question 20. Analysis of how a small medical device manufacturer specializing in innovative diagnostic kits should implement a quality management system, QMS, to comply with Regulation EU 2017/745 MDR, considering their limited resources and the need to ensure ongoing product safety and performance. Option A. Outsource the entire QMS development and maintenance to an external consultancy with minimal internal involvement to leverage their expertise and reduce the burden on internal staff. Option B. Develop a QMS based on a comprehensive template derived from ISO 13485/2016, tailoring it to the specific risks and processes associated with their diagnostic kits, and ensuring all personnel are trained on its implementation and maintenance. Option C. Purchase a generic QMS software package and implement it without significant customization, assuming it covers all necessary regulatory requirements for medical devices. Option D. Focus primarily on creating detailed technical documentation for each device, believing that robust product specifications will inherently ensure quality and negate the need for a formal, overarching QMS. The correct answer is B. Develop a QMS based on a comprehensive template derived from ISO 13485/2016, tailoring it to the specific risks and processes associated with their diagnostic kits, and ensuring all personnel are trained on its implementation and maintenance. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for medical device manufacturers transitioning to the MDR regulation, EU 2017/745. The core difficulty lies in interpreting and applying the broad requirements of Article 10 and Annex Roman 14 regarding the quality management system, QMS, in a way that is both compliant with the regulation and practical for a company of their size and resources. The challenge is amplified by the need to ensure the QMS is not merely a documented system, but is actively implemented and maintained to guarantee the safety and performance of their devices throughout their life cycle. Key aspect of this challenge is balancing the rigor of a QMS with the agility required for a small to medium-sized enterprise (SME) to remain competitive. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic and risk-based implementation of a QMS that aligns with the principles of ISO 13485-2016, which is the harmonized standard for medical device QMS under the MDR. This approach ensures that the QMS addresses all relevant aspects of the MDR, including design and development, risk management, post-market surveillance, and regulatory compliance. By focusing on the specific risks associated with their devices and processes, the manufacturer can tailor the QMS to be effective and efficient, avoiding unnecessary bureaucracy. This demonstrates best professional practice by prioritizing patient safety and device efficacy through a robust, yet proportionate quality system that is integrated into the company's operations. It directly addresses the intent of Article 10(2) of the MDR, which mandates a QMS that covers design, manufacturing, and post-market activities. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to adopt a one-size-fits-all QMS template without proper customization. This fails to account for the specific risks and complexities of the manufacturer's devices and processes, potentially leading to a QMS that is either overly burdensome and inefficient or, conversely, insufficient to ensure compliance and safety. This is a regulatory failure as it does not demonstrate a genuine understanding and application of the MDR's risk-based approach to QMS implementation. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on documentation without ensuring the QMS is actively implemented and followed by personnel. This creates a superficial compliance that will likely be exposed during audits and, more critically, fails to provide the necessary controls to ensure device safety and performance. This represents an ethical and regulatory failure because it prioritizes the appearance of compliance over actual product safety and patient well-being, violating the spirit and letter of the MDR. A third incorrect approach is to delegate QMS implementation entirely to an external consultant without adequate internal oversight or understanding. While consultants can be valuable, the ultimate responsibility for the QMS rests with the manufacturer. This approach can lead to a QMS that is not truly integrated into the company's culture or operations, making it difficult to maintain and adapt. This is a regulatory failure as it abdicates the manufacturer's fundamental responsibility for their devices and their QMS. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach QMS implementation under the MDR by first conducting a thorough gap analysis against Article 10 and Annex Roman 14, and relevant harmonized standards like ISO 13485-2016. This should be followed by a risk-based assessment to identify critical processes and potential hazards. The QMS should then be designed and documented to address these identified risks and regulatory requirements, with a strong emphasis on practical implementation and ongoing monitoring. Regular internal audits, management reviews, and employee training are crucial to ensure the QMS remains effective and compliant. The decision-making process should always prioritize patient safety and regulatory compliance, ensuring that the QMS is a living system that supports the entire product lifecycle.